The story of Lizzie Borden is one that has been told and retold so many times over the last 120 years or so. It spawned a children's nursery rhyme, films, a TV series, countless books and podcasts and YouTube videos, and I guess that today I'm adding one more into that mix. Back in 1892, Andrew Borden and his second wife Abby were found dead in their own home. Andrew was found first, but Abby, it's thought, had been killed about an hour and a half before Andrew. They were also found in different places. Andrew was found downstairs in his living room on the settee, whereas Abby was found upstairs in one of the spare bedrooms. Each had been killed by a hatchet to the head. The murders were brutal and unexpected. They were bloody. They were pretty disturbing, to be honest. No one else was seen entering or leaving the home. The only people home at the time were Andrew's youngest daughter, Lizzie, and the family's maid, Bridget Sullivan. Murder was the only crime committed. There was no evidence of a break-in, nothing was stolen, no one was sexually assaulted, there was no clear motive for anyone committing these murders outside of the family. Eventually, Lizzie was named the prime suspect and arrested. After a long trial and a hell of a lot of media interest, Lizzie was eventually found not guilty. But does that mean she was innocent? A lot of people today just kind of assume that Lizzie Borden committed the murders. It's kind of like a given. I mean, the children's nursery rhyme literally says that Lizzie Borden took an axe. But it is incredibly complicated. There's a lot of contradicting evidence, and it's difficult to know who and what to trust. A lot of the most reliable, trustworthy evidence is completely circumstantial, whereas a lot of the other evidence that would be more solid, for example, finding a murder weapon, just isn't there. Years on, there's still so much speculation about what actually happened, and I'm not sure if we're ever really gonna know. So that begs the question, why am I even bothering to make this video? The first thing I want to mention and talk about briefly before we jump into the kind of like bulk and the meat of this video is that with true crime cases like this, it's important to remember that they're not just something to gawp at. They're not just stories for our entertainment. Often real people have suffered or been hurt or been affected in some way, and we need to remember that and put that first when we talk about these stories and issues and things that have happened. These aren't characters in a book or a TV series. These are real people. We need to show respect and kindness when we talk about this, but that isn't to say we should just not talk about these cases at all. That isn't to say we should just ignore them and pretend they haven't happened. In fact, I think it's really important that we do talk about them. We can always learn something from examining and understanding true crime cases, even the old ones like the Lizzie Borden case that have been kind of sensationalized a bit. Sometimes this might be a deeper understanding of human behavior and why people behave in certain ways, why people do bad things sometimes, why people behave the way they do and react the way they do, or sometimes we can learn to look for warning signs and keep ourselves and others safe and stuff like that. I think there's always something we can take away from it, and as long as we're being respectful and not just using it as a grisly story for entertainment, it's absolutely fine, and in fact quite important to talk about these kinds of true crime cases. Lizzie Borden's case might be old, but I think it is one that we can learn a hell of a lot from. Mostly, I think it is a kind of cautionary tale in never underestimating people. It teaches us a hell of a lot about how not to handle a crime scene, and how we can do better in crime investigations today. And most importantly, I think by looking at how it was reported at the time, we get a very interesting insight into kind of bias and how secondary sources aren't always the most reliable. By looking at these newspaper articles and sources and things written about the case at the time, we get a real interesting insight into how bias affects how things were reported. So we can be a little bit more skeptical about how we read them, not just take things at face value. It teaches a hell of a lot about analysing these sources from history. This video was inspired by and is kind of mostly a review of the book The Trial of Lizzie Borden by Cara Robertson, which I actually picked up after watching 2 of Stephanie Harlowe's videos. You guys know I love Stephanie Harlowe. She's one of my favourite YouTubers. She did this amazing 2-part series on Lizzie Borden that spans, I think, just over like 2 hours or something like that. It is long, but it is worth every single minute. It is incredible. I really recommend watching them, and if you want to find out more about the case after this video, definitely go check them out. I'm going to link them in the description below. Stephanie's videos cover a lot of the stuff that the book doesn't. For example, Lizzie's childhood. It goes more in depth on the family relationships, especially between her and her sister Emma, who was her older sibling. It talks a lot about their relationship with their biological mother and also with Abby Borden in a bit more detail, whereas the book is a hell of a lot more in depth about the trial itself. It really goes into detail about who said what evidence was shown, how it was reported. It shows a hell of a lot of primary and secondary sources. It really kind of like goes into detail like that. I was so sure when I was watching Stephanie's videos that Lizzie Borden definitely committed the murders. It's like the story she told and the way she put forward the evidence really convinced me that Lizzie did it. But then reading the book by Cara Robertson, like, my mind changed so many times throughout the book, and I was like, oh, of course Lizzie did it. And I was like, oh god, no, but what if she didn't? There's this bit of evidence, and then there's this, and what if it is circumstantial? And then I was like, no, wait, she did it. And then I'm like, no, maybe she didn't. I was all over the place. If you are interested in reading this book, I will leave an affiliate link down in the description below, which means you can grab your own copy, and also it helps support me and my channel a little bit, because I get like a few pence from every sale. Physical and ebooks are my preferred choice of reading, but I know a lot of people don't have the time to sit down and read a book themselves. What they do have is time to listen to things, whether it's on your daily commute, while you're taking a bath, while you're preparing a meal, anything. And that's why I am very proud to say that the sponsor of today's video is Audible. Audible is one of the biggest and best audiobook libraries available, and I think it is an incredible, wonderful, amazing resource that I thoroughly recommend. If you use the link I have down in the description below, you can get a free trial which will give you 1 free audiobook to keep and listen to as many times, as often, whenever you would like. If you're already an Amazon Prime member, you will get 2 free audiobooks, which is pretty damn good if you ask me, because audiobooks can be pricey and expensive. And Audible is such a great deal because after your trial, it's only $7.99 a month and you get an audiobook of your choice from this huge, massive, extensive collection every single month, and it's just amazing value. So if you like your audiobooks and you want to check out the book that I'm going to be talking about in this video for yourself, you can grab it for free with a trial of Audible, and the link for that is down in the description below. So, the Borden murders. It was an incredibly well-documented case. The media at the time went absolutely crazy for it, and not only local reporters, but reporters from all over the county and the country came to kind of cover this case, and so there's a hell of a lot of newspaper reports about it. The problem with these reports is that a lot of the journalists had already made up their mind about whether Lizzie was innocent or guilty before the trial even started, before they started writing these stories, and so a lot of these reports are incredibly biased. It definitely highlights a big issue with secondary history sources like this. A primary source of evidence, for example, like the skulls of the victims, which we do see in this book, can't change. They're objective. It doesn't matter who's looking at them, the skull is still the skull. However, when you get a secondary source, like a newspaper story, which is someone kind of retelling the events from their perspective, you do get a hell of a lot of bias. Even if they try not to include it, there's definitely going to be some there. However impartial the newspaper reporters tried to remain, they were all going to interpret the events a little bit differently, and they did, and this is very clear throughout the book. Whether they admitted it or not, each reporter at the Borden trial had a preconceived notion about whether Lizzie was innocent or guilty, and that tainted how they viewed the trial. Throughout the book, we see that the evidence who thought she was guilty present every little bit of evidence as utterly damning, whereas the ones who thought she was innocent tried to make a kind of like joke out of it and be like, ah, is this all they've got? Take Elizabeth Jordan, for example. She was so sure of Lizzie's innocence, or at least you could tell she wanted to portray Lizzie as innocent. Whether she actually believed her or not is another story. But she was dead set on making sure the public thought Lizzie was innocent, and that was so clear in all of her writing. She was more lenient, she was kind to Lizzie, she tried to present everything with like a positive spin on it. Take the descriptions of Lizzie's behaviour at the inquest of Andrew and Abby before the trial. So this was during the investigation, as an example. Lizzie was said to be displaying like very little emotion at the inquest. She wasn't kind of crying or hysterical, but she wasn't happy or anything either. She was, I guess, just very kind of, there's just no emotion there, basically. A reporter from the Boston Herald describes this as impassive coolness, and it was said it was evidence of her insanity. This reporter wrote that there is nothing that tends more to induce the belief in insanity in this case than this most extraordinary exhibition. On the other hand, Elizabeth Jordan, who wanted to portray Lizzie as innocent, described her behaviour very differently. She said, "No jury will believe that woman, with her firm face and steady, intelligent eyes, ever did any important thing that she had not subjected to the unobscured light of reason." Very different portrayals of exactly the same behaviour. And what can we learn from this? Well, it proves that there's a hell of a lot of personal bias when it comes to our news, and this is something that we can and should consider and think about today. Our perceptions of someone can change dramatically on who's telling the story about them. Their guilt or innocence, whether we like them or not, whether we trust them, it can all be greatly influenced by who is telling the story. Lizzie Borden is just one example of this, but today we see it absolutely everywhere. In news articles, in news reports on TV, in YouTube videos, on film, in documentaries, absolutely every part of life. So we definitely need to consider who we're getting our information from and what their biases and reasons, what their motives are for kind of telling a certain story in that way before we just blindly believe someone or not. The takeaway from this is that we all need to remain as skeptical as possible within reason. Never just blindly believe what you read or are told. Even if you think you can trust an author, if you're ever in doubt, look at the objective facts for yourself. Go back to those primary sources. Read information from multiple sources. Evaluate each source. When are they creating this? Why? What do they have to gain or lose from the outcome? So in the example of Lizzie Borden, before deciding whether she was guilty or innocent, we shouldn't just read one newspaper article about the trial. We should read several of these news articles to try and gauge what a range of people from all kinds of different backgrounds all took away from it, which this book does include. We should go directly to the court transcripts and what people who were there and witnesses said. We should look at the primary evidence like the skulls and the forensic reports at the time and that sort of stuff. We should look at the crime scene photos and the bits of evidence collected, and we should bring it all together and evaluate it all as one big whole thing. Never just take one single source. A big problem in the Borden trial, which this book did a really good job of highlighting, was that a lot of the evidence for Lizzie's supposed guilt was completely circumstantial. There was nothing all that solid. If you're going to convict someone of murder, you need to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that they actually did it. You need some pretty solid evidence. Today, this might mean finding DNA evidence or finding CCTV evidence showing the person at the crime scene, something like this, or, a huge mix and range of all kinds of different things. You might find them with bloody clothes or the murder weapon or whatever. It needs to be pretty solid. In order to get these bits of evidence, there are certain procedures at crime scenes that need to be followed to make sure none of the evidence is tainted or ruined or mislaid, to make sure all of it's collected properly, to know what to look for, all that kind of thing. In the Borden case, it is very clear to me from reading the book that the case was mishandled from the very beginning. We can't be too mad about this because it was a long time ago and they didn't have the procedures and rules in place that we have today. We're far more strict now about handling crime scenes, but it does demonstrate the importance of these rules. The crime scene was altered by medical professionals and the first officers on the scene of the case, and it was never properly sealed off. Evidence was contaminated. When they got to the crime scene, they knew that only two people were definitely there at the time, Lizzie Borden and Bridget Sullivan, and they were both completely underestimated and not treated as the suspects they should have been. Now, perhaps they were underestimated and treated so leniently because they were women, particularly Lizzie, who was a white, middle-class woman who helped out at a church. They took one look at her and thought, she's not going to be the murderer. The truth is, anyone can commit a murder. Anyone can be a criminal. And because these two women were underestimated in such a way and they weren't treated as suspects right away, the crime scene was completely mishandled, and those two as suspects were completely mishandled. Neither of their clothing was collected for evidence. Neither of them were kind of examined properly for evidence at the time. And this was a real issue with Lizzie, because it meant that she had time to go and change, and later she was seen burning a dress. Was she potentially getting rid of evidence? A murder weapon was never found, but there's lots of weird contradicting reports of, well, this hatchet was found and this axe was found. We found an axe head here, and so-and-so said they found an axe handle here and a head here, but they didn't see it here, and they didn't see it here, and nothing was properly collected or handled. No one really knew what they were looking for. There's lots of weird contradicting testimonies from all the different officers at the scene. It's a bit of a mess. Everyone seems to have experienced completely different things, and there is no consistency between any of the testifying officers. Honestly, with how everything was handled, it's no surprise anyone was ever, sentenced to, be punished for this crime. Let's go back to the issue of Lizzie's dress, for example, because this is, a big, massive point of contention throughout the whole trial and the whole book. The murders of Andrew and Abby were so violent that it seems that whoever killed them would have had at least some blood on them. But here's the problem. Different experts testified at the trial, saying different things. One of them said, yes, the murderer would definitely be covered head to foot in blood. There's no way they could hide that amount of blood on them. Another said, maybe not. They could probably get away with just a little splash on them. It might not be very obvious. So how much blood were they looking for on the suspect? We've no idea. Different testimonies. And then there's Lizzie herself. No one could say for sure what Lizzie was wearing on the morning of the murders. There were oh god, I know off the top of my head, probably 10 different people testifying about different things that they saw Lizzie wearing, and none of them was the same. The only consensus was it was a blue dress. And, there was something like 10 blue dresses in the house at the time, so it was which one was it? At some point during the investigation, while the police were there, Lizzie was allowed to go and change from the blue dress she was wearing to a pink dress for some reason. And no one really knows what happened to that blue dress she was wearing that morning. No one, immediately took it off her as she got changed. No one took it from her as they got to the crime scene. It's kind of one of these, big mysteries of, what happened to the dress Lizzie was actually wearing. No one knows if she wore 2 different blue dresses that morning. Did she kill Abby, get changed, kill Andrew, get changed again? I don't know. Did she put on an apron, kill them, take the apron off? No one really knows. Because there's a bunch of different testimonies with a bunch of different descriptions of different dresses Lizzie was supposedly wearing, and no one knows what happened because no one can remember exactly what she was wearing. There are also bloody rags found in the cellar at the Borden house. Could these be Lizzie clearing up after the murders? Could this be she wore an apron and then ripped it up afterwards after it got blood on it? We don't know, because no one bothered to look at them properly, or inspect them, or question them, because Lizzie just said, oh, I'm on my period, and the bunch of male investigators at the time were apparently too squeamish to, do anything about it. The issue of these bloody rags wasn't even brought up in court, which is ridiculous. Bloody rags found at the crime scene, and it wasn't even mentioned in the trial. All because the male investigators were too squeamish to mention a woman's period. No one even knows if she was on her period or not, or if she was just making that up to cover up for the fact that, she'd been cleaning up blood that morning. And of course, because it was a long time ago, no one knows whose blood it was. It's all just a bit of a mess. And then there's a testimony from Alice Russell, who was Lizzie's friend and cousin. She testified that the night after the murders, Lizzie burnt a dress. The story was that this dress had paint on it, and it was old and tatty, and so Lizzie just got rid of it. And the timing was oh, it's just a bit unfortunate. Ugh. But of course, it looks incredibly suspicious. And the dress Lizzie was burning was a blue dress, which just adds more to the suspicion. Was she getting rid of evidence that she committed the murders? It's one of these things we'll never know for sure, but again, there's so much speculation around it, and so many people providing different bits of evidence about all kinds of different stuff. There was a hell of a lot of back and forth over this dress. Did anyone see a dress with paint on it? How about a dress with blood on it? Could either a dress with paint or blood on it be hidden somewhere in the house and the investigators didn't find it when they searched everywhere? Was the dress really burnt, or was it something else, for example, a murder weapon? Was there any history of the Bordens burning old dresses? They literally had some old painter come in to testify that, oh yeah, Lizzie once said to me that she was going to burn a dress. And that was a key bit of evidence in this court case. It's really bizarre. During an investigation today, they would have bagged all the clothes any potential witnesses or suspects were wearing, investigated everything, done a thorough search of the house, not just a quick glance at the closets, If you ask me, the problem stems from the fact that the original investigators took one look at Lizzie, who, despite being the only person with real opportunity and motive, they took one look at her and saw she was a nice-looking, rich, white lady who worked a lot with the local church and said, nah, Couldn't have done it. And so they didn't bother to investigate properly, and then later when they realised, ah crap, maybe it is her, they'd already bungled a load of evidence and given her the opportunity to burn clothes and get rid of evidence and God knows what else. They seriously screwed up by underestimating her because she was a woman. So what can we learn from this? Well, for one, crime scenes need to be handled and managed properly. Two, no matter how nice someone looks, they can still be a murderer. Now, I don't want this video to get too long, and I don't want to give too much away about the book because I'd really encourage you all to go out and read it for yourself. I really enjoyed it. I also don't want to sway your opinions too much with my thoughts and that sort of thing. So I thoroughly recommend you go check out the book, go check out Stephanie's videos, go check out a bunch of other sources for yourself and come to your own conclusions. But to conclude, there is a hell of a lot we can learn from Lizzie Borden's trial, even though it was 120-something years ago. We can learn so much from this, even if we can't come to any solid conclusions about who actually committed these murders. The book itself by Cara Robertson I would really recommend. It's not a perfect book by any means. At times it does get a little heavy and a little dry. It may be too detailed in places, while at the same time there are certain areas that I wish they'd gone into a little bit more detail, for example about Lizzie's childhood, about the family life before the murder, about her potential motives, and so on. I should warn you that I was reading the ebook version and I didn't realise there were actual crime scene photos in the book, but there are. So, a few of these are pretty graphic. There's some pictures of the skulls, there's a picture of Andrew and Abby's dead bodies there at the crime scene. I wasn't expecting this, so I'm just like there reading through my ebook when suddenly like, black and white blood. So if you're squeamish or struggle with that kind of stuff, just be prepared. But honestly, there's not that much and it's not too bad, so, you know, use your own judgment on that. They are pretty much my only complaints though. Other than that, I'd say it's probably the most detailed account of the investigation and trial that I've ever come across, and it is very interesting. The author shows very little bias throughout, which I was very impressed with. So I did find myself, my opinion being swayed so many times, like backwards and forwards as I was reading these new bits of information. I was just utterly enthralled when I was reading it, and I really recommend it for that reason. Overall, I would say if you're interested in the details of the case, I would recommend both reading the book and watching Stephanie's video. Stephanie's videos are great if you want kind of more of a good narrative. Like, you want a well-told story. You want to understand the reasons behind why Lizzie potentially committed these crimes. If you want to kind of like understand a little bit more about the family life, watch Stephanie's videos. Whereas if you want something with all the details and a really in-depth look at the investigation and the trial, and you want to try and figure out the events and what happened for yourself, I'd recommend the book. And so with that, I am going to end this and open the floor to you guys. Have you read The Trial of Lizzie Borden by Cara Robertson? And if so, what did you think? Do you know much about this trial anyway? Let me know. Do you think Lizzie did it? Was she innocent? Was she guilty? Did someone else do it? Do you have any other theories? And what else do you think we can learn and take away from this case? I'm opening the floor to you. Let me know your ideas down in the comments below. Don't forget to check out Audible, today's sponsor for this video. Thank you so much to them for supporting my channel. Thank you so much to you guys for being here and sticking around and being amazing. And yeah, thank you for watching today, and I'll see you guys again soon.